and tried to kid myself that I was okay, situation normal. Breathe, make a cup of tea. But my hands gave me away, as they always do. They were shaking too much. I ended up spilling boiling water all over the bench top. Some went on my hand and down the front of my tracksuit pants. I shook my hand angrily. I could feel hot tears welling my eyes. As usual, they were tears of frustration more than anything else. I'd had to use a pad for the bleeding, and it was already feeling sodden. Stinging was still ever present. Urinating wasn't going to be much fun for a while. Over an hour had passed, and yet there was still no Tsar. I was happy about that. I couldn't have hidden it all from him before then. He would have noticed. I'd had to clean up the mess as well. I'd thrown my torn knickers and blood-stained skirt into a plastic bag and into the bin. I'd had a shower, thought I was okay to make a cuppa. It seemed I wasn't. So I gave up and sat down in the darkened lounge. What I needed was a plan, but I had absolutely no idea where to start. Report Ian to the police? Well, the knickers and the skirt were still in the bin. Then again, that would mean the whole game was up. Couldn't imagine my career would survive. Sure, I'd get a job with another firm, but I'd forever be known as the hooker. It probably wouldn't bother me enormously on a personal level, but it wouldn't be a career enhancement, particularly in my conservative field of commercial and conveyancing law. In any event, I still didn't want Tsar, Amar, Branka, Chloe, etc. to know about my past, especially when it wouldn't be revealed on my terms, when it was already hard enough to fit into a world that didn't particularly seem to want me. I was noticing how sore I was, not just down there, but also where Ian had dug his knees into the insides of my thighs. That hurt. The muscle was so corked I could barely move around normally. My scalp was still aching from my hair being pulled. More than an hour later, I could even see bruises on the inside of my wrists and forearms. Funny how easily we bruise. You can well understand why I had bruises on the inside of my thighs, but on my wrists, that was the last place I would have thought of as injured. It made me wonder what happened to us as kids when we used to horse around, or when we collided on the hockey field or netball court. I suppose we got bruised and didn't care or notice. I can tell you at that moment I did care. I did notice. The thing is, I didn't just want to survive. I wanted revenge. I wanted to destroy Ian. There had to be a way of doing it. One which didn't involve destroying myself. Had Tsar come home at that point, I would have pretended I was sulking. He would have sulked. The whole thing would have just gone unnoticed. As it happens, he never did come home. Instead, I got a rather strange phone call. I really wasn't in the mood to answer. My mobile was on the coffee table in the darkness, and the musical tone was blaring away. I must have pressed the volume up accidentally when I last grabbed it. Either that or it bumped something in my purse. Anyway, I watched it for a while, annoyed at its shrillness and insistence. They're such intrusive devices, you can't get any peace with them around. I was about to let it go to message bank when I picked it up with my shaky hand, fumbled the swipe and answered, thinking it might be Tsar. It wasn't. In fact, I couldn't recognize the number at all. It had a +55 prefix, which I assumed was international. Amar? No, hers was +1. Hello? I said, trying to replicate the usual frequency and cadence of my voice. Justine, Picklejig here. Sorry to bother you at home, but I need your help, as it happens, rather urgently. I'm sorry, Mr. Picklejig, I really can't help you right now. I'm not feeling well. If you contact Branka, I can give you her mobile. What I have to say concerns you directly. You use an iPhone, yes? Yes, that's right. How did you know that? I'll switch to FaceTime. Please don't. But in the next minute I found myself staring at a man seated on a veranda somewhere tropical. In the morning, by the look of it. It took me a few seconds to recognize who it was. Carl, is that you? Hi, Justine, he said. Can't see you all that well, my dear. You're in the dark. And I'm calling from Brazil, hence the difference in time. I was expecting a call from Mr. Picklejig.
That was me. You never noticed before that our voices were the same?
No, now that you mention it. I suppose it should have been obvious. You mean you're Picklejig?
Actually, not anymore. Picklejig is a made-up name I used to use as an alias. I've since given it over to Dan. But that's a long story. Right now, I need you to go and check up on him.
On who? Dan? You're kidding.
No, I'm being deadly serious.
Why? What's all this about?
I was speaking to him on Skype. He was down in the basement. He heard something upstairs and went to investigate. Next thing, there was a whole lot of shouting, smashing, and so on. He never came back. I'd go and check up on him myself, but I've noticed that travel is bad with the old ticker at the moment.
Carl tapped his heart as he said this. You'd check up on him, but you're in Brazil.
Exactly. Anyway, it all looks rather urgent. I fear something untoward has happened.
Then I'll call the police.
Absolutely not. I forbid it. As your client, I insist that no police be involved at this stage. That is an imperative. Do you understand? If you can't make it, I'll have to do something else, something that is inherently dangerous for me. Can you go over there straight away, yes or no?
You haven't got a clue what you're asking of me.
Maybe not. You probably don't have a clue as to the gravity of the situation. If you can't go, I'll have to try. And right now I'm pretty sure that it will kill me, as it almost did last time.
What the hell are you talking about?
I don't have time to explain that now. Are you in or out? If it helps, I heard Dan shouting, "Ian!" I suspect your former beau has gone and beaten the snot out of him. Dan might be unconscious of a broken leg or be bleeding to death for all I know. I'm worried sick, and you're the only one who can help.
I couldn't fathom why I was the only one who could help. But the mention of Ian's name had already made me grab my car keys, and I was hobbling to the front door. When did all this happen, Carl? I asked.
In the last few minutes. That's why I need you to go there right away. Please tell me you're going.
I'm on my way.
Excellent. I'll be forever grateful. Call me on this number when you get there. Hurry.
Okay, Carl.
Call me Frank. That's my real name. Frank Djurdjevic.
I was never more confused in my life than when I got into my car that night. Confused and worried sick. It was obvious to me that Ian had just been over to the Prince's Hill house, and to use Picklejig's, Carl's, Frank's terminology, beaten the snot out of Dan. I knew I had to hurry as fast as I could. I wished to God that I could have just called the police and an ambulance. I consoled myself that the traffic had at least died down a bit. On the other hand, Melbourne is definitely one of those cities that never sleeps, so there was still plenty to get in my way. As I drove, I tried to reconcile the jumbled facts that had just been given. Picklejig and Carl were the same person. That person happened to be Frank Djurdjevic, Dan's uncle. Yet I'd gone to Frank's funeral, for God's sake. Obviously he can't have died. So either the casket was empty or someone else's body was in it. Then I remembered that Frank Djurdjevic had apparently died at a barbecue from choking, or a heart attack, or both. I couldn't remember. It was all very public anyway. I simply couldn't see how anyone could fake death in such circumstances. And what would be the point? Otherwise, Fenyops Picklejig was a made-up name. I really should have seen that one from a mile off. Silly me. And I can't imagine why I never picked Carl and Picklejig as being one and the same person. In my defence, Carl always used a very deferential tone, where Picklejig was inclined to be perfunctory, perhaps even abrupt in his phone calls. Even so, I was left feeling like a latter-day Lois Lane, who wasn't smart enough to work out that Clark Kent minus glasses was Superman. I was blown away by the revelation that Frank had given over the Picklejig alias to Dan. The heaven knew what that was all about. The main thing was this meant that Dan had every right to be in the house. He wasn't a squatter after all. In relation to Dan, this left only two things unexplained: his supposed presence in Malaysia, and why his wife in Perth seemed to have less idea about what was going on than I did. I checked my iPhone while at the intersection of Punt Road and Victoria Street. Frank was definitely calling from Brazil. +55 is that country's international dialing code. Bearing this in mind, Frank's oblique references to checking on Dan didn't make any sense at all. The travel would take a couple of days at best, factoring in even the most generous times for booking airline tickets and what have you. The poor man seemed to have lost his wits, probably from worry. For a moment this made me feel a bit easier about the whole Ian beating up Dan thing. Possibly the old guy was confused. On the other hand, that seemed to be the only lucid part of Frank's story, and I'd just experienced Ian's violence myself. So I suppose that's why I was driving dangerously. And I wasn't just speeding, I was running amber lights, at least one red light, hitting curbs and changing lanes without checking, driving like a lunatic. The reason came down to a single word: Ian. Ian must have gotten the house key from Branca, or Branca's PA. Neither of them could have refused him. In fact, as a partner of the firm, he had every right to inspect the property, especially when there had been an apparent break and enter. He would have gone in through the front door. Dan would have heard him and walked up out of the basement. I tried not to think about it. In the end, it only took me about 15 minutes to reach Princess Hill. When I pulled into the driveway in front of Dan's place, Mrs. Chu ran out to greet me. I didn't think that was a particularly good sign. "Hello, miss. You're a friend of Mr. Picklejig? There was some fighting going on in the house. The other man is gone now. He went inside, come back later, with a bloody mouth. I got his number plates. I didn't know if I should call the police." "Have you spoken with Mr. Picklejig?" "I knocked, and Mr. Picklejig sure he's okay, but his house is very quiet now for a long time, Law." "I'll go in and see. I already tried, door is locked." I checked the handle. It really was locked. Ian must have closed up after he left. Like Mrs. Chu, I knocked and called out, "Dan!" But there was no answer. Maybe he'd gone to bed. I knocked again, but there was still no answer. "I call the police now?" asked Mrs. Chu from behind. Then I suddenly remembered. I'd locked up the house when I left that morning. I still had the house key. "Hold on, Mrs. Chu," I said, rummaging through my handbag. "I have a key here somewhere. I will go inside with you." "No, it's okay. I'll call you if I need help." "Thank you, Mrs. Chu." "Tosia." "Bosiami. You let me know if you need me, okay?" "I will." I unlocked the door and was engulfed by darkness. The glare of the exterior light cast everything inside into shadow. "Dan, are you there?" Dan had shouted to Mrs. Chu that he was okay earlier on. Surely that meant something. But why wasn't he answering now? Maybe he had gone to bed. That would have meant leaving Frank on Skype in the basement. Did he have another concussion? The house was dark, other than a light in the kitchen. I could see the hall stand had been turned over. A mirror had been smashed. A few of the wall Kolbush artworks looked like they'd been body-rammed. At that moment my phone started ringing. I pulled it out. It was Frank. "Justine, are you there? Is Dan okay?" "I've just got here. He seems to have survived the fight, but he's not answering. I'm taking a look around. Right now I'm switching on the hall light." As I did this, the full extent of the damage became apparent. Shards of glass littered the hallway, and I had to be careful where I stepped. Some of the pieces could have gone right through my ridiculous bathroom slippers very easily. I still couldn't see Dan anywhere. "There's a lot of mess, Frank. Broken things. There's a bit of blood in the hallway, but not much." "Don't hang up. Keep me on the line. I can help." "Okay." "Where are you now?" "Walking into the lounge room." "Anything?" "Not yet. Hang on. I see spots of blood on the rug. Trying to find the light for the lounge. The only light I'm getting is from the kitchen." "Switch is on the wall near the first set of windows." "Got it." The switch turned on the coffee table lights. A dull yellow glow, but more than enough to see. "Hang on, Frank, he's here. He's collapsed behind the coffee table." I ran up to Dan's motionless body. By the sick light of the lampshades I could see he was lying face down in vomit. I turned him over. "Frank! His face is blue." "Check his pulse." "No pulse. He's not breathing."
"Clear his airway."
"I'm going to call an ambulance."
"You'll do no such thing. You'll do CPR on him while I call. Go on, clear the airway. Start CPR. Put me on speakerphone. I'll use my landline to call the ambulance for you."
"Frank, it looks too late. Frank, he's dead. Do you hear me? Frank! Frank!" I must have screamed 6 times more. I was sitting on the floor, smeared in vomit, cradling Dan's blue face. and all of a sudden I heard running in the corridor, and then sliding on glass.
Shit! What happened here?
The voice sounded familiar. "Who's there? We need help! Here in the lounge!"
"Hold on!"
Abruptly, out of the shadows, there was Dan. I looked at him, then back at the person I was cradling. Both were dressed identically, the same pinstriped shirt and suit trousers from this morning, no tie. The one I was holding was badly smashed about in nose and mouth. The one standing in the corridor looked the same as when I last saw him. He looked at me and then ran up and felt the pulse of his doppelganger. After a few seconds he said calmly, "I'm afraid he's gone, Joss."
Same as what happened to Frank. Sudden cardiac death brought on by choking, most probably. There's nothing we can do.
"Who are you?"
"He's Dan," came Frank's voice over the speakerphone. "I printed another one. Don't worry, it'll all be fine from here. I know exactly what to do. Now listen carefully.